I've read some amazing books for transgirl April, including an absolutely mind-blowing book that taught me something about the problematic ways I think, and it's teeny tiny. In this video, I'm going to wrap up that book and the other books I read for this wonderful readathon. And I've got to say, I've got more than one excellent book to talk about. Transgirl April is a readathon organised by the wonderful Kevi. At the time of scripting, she's got 999 subscribers. So go check out an artistic trans drag queen reading machine. Kevi has organised this with Willow from Books and Bow, who is deservedly one of the biggest booktubers on this platform. Both these women have great channels. Go check them out. Before I start, I just want to say I had some real difficulty finding books, specifically books written by trans men or trans people of colour. I'm on a real strict budget. I'm studying full time. I am lucky enough that I haven't had to pay for script for some time because people keep using the link in the show notes, which gives them 2 months free and me 1 month free. But other than that, I've purchased 3 books all year, and one of them was 99 cents. It feels like such a luxury to buy books at the moment. So I'm relying on my library, on Libby, on Scribd, and I really struggle to find some books. So what I would love everybody to do is your local library allows you to request that they buy books. Please utilize this. Please ask for a book by a trans author, specifically by a trans man or a trans person of colour, as they seem to be hard to find. Make sure that there are copies available in your library to support your trans community. Make sure that people can see themselves in libraries. Your librarian likes you helping them in this way. They like people requesting books because it allows them to cater for the gaps in their collection. Time to talk about the books, and I'm going to start with my DNFs and work my way up to my favourite book, The Map of Salt and Stars by Joukhadar Zeyn. This is a book with 2 storylines, or 2 timelines rather. One based in New York in modern times, the other based in Syria. It's really a pet hate of mine. Authors not providing a hook. Authors not telling me why I should be interested in reading their book early. I need that communication to engage with your novel. And there are 2 storylines here, and that really slows down everything that you're doing. Not having that hook and trying to develop all of this that's going on, it's really hard for me to keep interest. Looking at the reviews of this online, it really does seem to be a polarizing book. Female Husbands, A Trans History by Jen Manion. This is a history of people before not just the term transgendered was around, but also the term lesbian was around. This is about the history of women who married and took husbands who were women. I don't really know how to describe this because it's a group of people and trying to give them a collective identity is horrible. We don't know if the husbands were trans, butch, lesbian, non-binary. These are all modern identities anyway. They might have identified differently. This is an absolutely fascinating subject, and I nearly decided to continue reading through some of the most needlessly academic and repetitive and inaccessible writing I have ever seen. This is a university professor level muddle. And I'm not talking about no English professor. You want proper, you want some humanities where writing is not a big deal. During the introduction, the same facts are repeated a minimum of 4 times. This is why ghostwriters exist, because excellent topic, well researched, terrible writing skill. If you've read this book, please make a video about all the interesting stuff. Discuss it in 15-20 minutes. It would be wonderful. Manywhere by Morgan Thomas. Once I finished the books I wanted to read for this long list, I decided to read some extra books, and I jumped on the short list for trans fiction from the Lambda Awards, and I could only find 2 books from this year. So I read them without even reading the synopsises. This is a collection of short stories that just didn't grab my attention. I'm not a big short story fan in the first place. I'll read them, but novels are my happy place. I don't really know much of what this book is about, but for short stories, if I read your first book and I'm just like, whatever, I don't even really know what's happened, I'm not into this, That's it. That's all you get. On to the books I finished. Coffee Boy, Austin Chant. I should say all of these books that I finished, I do recommend. Some more than others. This is a queer man-man romance about Kieran, a trans man with long hair who starts work as an intern for a local politician and meets Seth, 10 to 15 years his senior, and the kind of guy that requires several laxatives before he's any fun. This is a grumpy sunshine romance, but it also feels a bit enemies to lovers. Seth is the only person in the office who gets Kieran's pronouns correct, and he basically seems like an uptight idiot who likes peppermint coffee. What the actual fuck? Is that a thing? Look, you could get coffee, you could freeze it in liquid nitrogen, and you could crucify it. But that doesn't make it a good idea. I feel like I'm meant to buy into Kieran not liking Seth, so that when the two of them realise that they're horny for one another, it has more of an impact. But I just don't. It's just like quite obvious. But this is sweet, this is nice, this is fun. It's a completely enjoyable read if you just don't think about it too much, if you just turn your brain off for a bit. Personally, I didn't find the relationship arc or the character development super believable, but I liked Kieran and I liked Seth despite his appalling coffee habits. Like a lot of romance books, this is one of these books where the joy and the experience of reading it overshadows what is quite poor execution. 3 stars. Stonefruit, Lilay, a graphic novel about a queer relationship between Bron and Ray, and how they're different when they get to be aunties to Ray's niece, Nessie. I love the physical manifestation of the change that this little girl brought about in these adults. It sort of demonstrated to me how neither of these adults were in the best of places themselves. The book itself, it conjures up themes of acceptance, wearing masks, found family, rejection, and how our identity can be rejected by our blood family. There is a clash between church and a queer identity, and the feeling of abandonment from Bron's younger sister when Bron leaves to be Bron. This book is gloomy or sad without ever really having that emotional hammer blow. That's definitely not how you hit a hammer. It didn't really try to hit you, but it is a book with the central theme of depression. I don't think the format was best suited to this story, to be honest. I like a little bit more immersion in my characters' feelings, and I've not read a lot of graphic novels. I don't know how that could be achieved, but I just feel like this would have been better with more descriptions. 3 stars. Burning Roti, Breaking Barriers as a Queer Indian Woman, Sharan Dhaliwal. Caveat. I read this book on a whim. It was not part of this readathon. It was just because it was there and it looked good. But I swear that the author said that they were genderqueer when I was reading this. Now, a few weeks later, I've tried to verify that they're genderqueer, and I can only find online that they use she, her, that they describe themselves as a woman, and that they're queer. So I'm probably muddling this up. I'm probably wrong, but they're a supporter of trans people. They want to fight capitalism, white supremacy, the destigmatization of body hair. So I figure if I'm wrong, and I'm pretty sure I am, there's still going to be a big crossover of people interested in trans authors and this book. This is a short memoir of a hairy, queer, South Asian British woman. She discusses many issues, and this is the first book that I've ever seen both call out SWERFs, that is, sex worker exclusionary radical feminists, and acknowledge that there is a massive people trafficking problem within the sex industry. This is, in my opinion, the most divisive topic within progressive circles, and is an issue that is largely not discussed in recent times. I don't want to discuss this topic now because it is a very small section of the book, but this is a topic that would have made me DNF the book if the conversation around it were simplistic and didn't acknowledge both very valid sides to this argument. Body hair is a massive part of this memoir, as too is identity, both queer and South Asian. There's an interesting discussion around skin lightening cream and the capitalist hypocrisy that is included with that. While this is a memoir, it kind of feels like an excuse to discuss political issues and identity. And identity is, I guess, what a memoir is about, and political issues need to be discussed if you're an activist and they're part of who you are. But Diwali's brain is much more interesting than her life. so maybe this could have been repackaged or better marketed. Dhaliwal started Oh Queer Cupid and is the director of Middlesex Pride. Also, side note, Roti. I've always said Rottie, but is it Roti? Is this a Western stuff-up, or is this a difference between the way Australian and British people say this word? I don't want to be the idiot that's still calling it faux. Let me know, specifically if you're from a culture that cooks that doesn't import that meal, that doesn't see that bread as ethnic. Tell me, how do you say it? How should the word be said? Because I'd like to get that one right. Felix Everafter, Kacen Callender. This is a fun YA novel about a trans boy who is at the same time trying to get his father and the people around him to respect him as a man while still questioning their gender. Felix has never been in love and would really like to. Felix's last relationship ended when the girl said that being a trans guy automatically made you not feminist, which is the turfiest thing I could think of. Then Felix starts to get anonymous messages online spouting trans hate. Felix's dad often gets drunk and says things like, "You'll always be my little girl." He doesn't trust Felix and his best friend Ezra, who is loaded, to sleep over together. Felix and Ezra's relationship moves from solid to turbulent over the novel. And then there's Declan, who Felix is in competition with for a scholarship at a university and who used to date Ezra. Ezra and Felix now hate Declan and the feelings are returned. This is a coming-of-age novel. YA for me is quite an interesting genre because a lot of the things that I will criticize adult literature for doing, YA is onto it. YA is really good at giving you the hook, at giving you a reason to read a book. It always develops a plot. It always has characters. And I very, very rarely hate a YA book, but it always feels a little bit watery to me. I always want more, and this is no exception. If you enjoy YA novels, I think this will be an exceptional book. But for me, I enjoyed myself, but it was just a nice book. 3 stars. On to the 4-star reads, and the next 3 books, they could be in any order. The All of It, A Bogan Rhapsody, Candace Bell. This is a memoir, although it reads like a coming-of-age story. And I didn't realise it was a memoir when I started it. And I was a bit critical of one of the characters being too unrealistic, only to find out that they're a real person, which I think the phrase is Jesus, Mary and Joseph and the wee donkey. Candace is trans. It took her some time to figure that out. They're from Mudgee in rural Australia, about a 3-hour drive from Sydney. Not very familiar with New South Wales. It could be completely different. This reads like such an Aussie fiction novel. References to things like chicken salt and dim sims, and of course, bogans, an Aussie term that roughly translates into ochre, another Aussie term that you probably don't know. A socio-economic group of Aussies who are rough, lack culture, and refer to beer as a tinny, but only if it comes in a can. To be fair, you probably just consider all Aussies bogans. They are the majority of our population. It's a term that is similar to, but has much more love and acceptance attached to it than the US redneck or the British chav. Obviously, there are its own cultural references and identities within that, but it can be a derogatory term and a complimentary term, really like basically any word in Australian, depending on how you say it. We see Belle as a young child who loves English, who discovers that they have a tiny penis. I'm not really sure why she decided to include that, but it's in there. She discusses her family's racism, at one point using both the N and the C word to describe Ernie Dingo, who they liked. I don't really think that white authors should be doing that. But also, I don't think we should dismiss the racist attitudes of our past. It's not nice to try and make things look nicer than they really were. So I understand that the conflict that the author has, but I think you just need to ask black people what they want you to do. The conversation, however, was very 3 generations of Australians. You can't say that. No, you can't, but leave her alone. What? The N-word? Really? No, you can't say it. I said leave her alone. Okay, well, I didn't know. Such an Australian conversation. I think explains so much about our racist attitudes. Honestly, let's boil this down. This is excellent storytelling, great writing, but this is my issue with memoirs. A little exaggeration, a little more character building, a little more conflict than there really was, and this is a great story. But with memoirs, there is this desire to be accurate. Candace's parents oscillate from supporting of their transition to saying, we're already the laughingstock of the town because of your brother, can't you just be normal and cut this bullshit out? Their mother literally labelled a fight that they had with their brother as boys will be boys. This acceptance and not acceptance, it either needed to have more consistency in characters, which it's a memoir so you can't do that, or it needed more emotional awareness of what sort of feelings that this up and down attitude was creating in Candace. I just didn't get that. But this is a relatively small issue in an otherwise good book. And I think that this book does an excellent job of capturing this rural Australian culture. So if you're looking for something just quintessentially Australian, I recommend this trans memoir as a really interesting read. Nevada, Imogen Benny. This is a trans classic, but does referring to books published in 2013 as a classic make anybody else feel old? 10 years ago. This is a book in two halves. Both halves follow Maria, trans, almost 30, working in a bookshop in New York, which she hates. She's about to break up with her girlfriend who she lives with, so she might be homeless soon. She's late for her estrogen injection, and she's generally not having a good time of things. Through the first half of this novel, we get this really good picture of Maria, her situation, and where being trans makes things hard for her, and where just being young, femme, and living in New York makes things hard for her. The second part begins with Maria going on a road trip and she meets James and Egg. And the hypothetical question is, what if, as a trans person, you met another trans person when you were still young and dumb and figuring things out? I love these two together. This is such an interesting part of the book. This is where all the discussion and the learning and the brain food is. And not just the brain food, the emotions, and this is a good bit. Binnie shows us how our identity of gender confuses things. James thinks he's sexually attracted to a female version of himself. James thinks Maria is brilliant, her gender and being out and being comfortable. But James isn't trans. That is something they say multiple times. Of course, James is trans, but this book is about the realization and the work that James needs to do before they can become trans. It's about the process. James is attracted to their girlfriend, but they have issues with sex, which James doesn't understand, but is definitely due to their gender identity and feeling uncomfortable in certain situations. James is almost sexually attracted to Maria, and it's such an interesting blur because James probably isn't interested in Maria at all, but is attracted to their ability to express their gender, is attracted to just them existing, being fabulous, being brilliant, being there and in front of them. And that blurriness is so interesting, how your identity and your views of other people's identity can blend into your sexuality in such a confusing way for a young person. Oh, that was nice. I think a lot of people's first trans novel was Detransition Baby, and I think if you're curious and just want to learn through fiction, this is just a much better novel. This demonstrated what Peter's novel was really doing rather than what I took from it. I still think that Tori Peters' Detransition Baby is an excellent book, and I think this is, and I probably put this a little bit too far low down the list, a really, really worthwhile read that I think is one of these books that will just get better the longer it is I've read it and the more I get to think about it. The Story of Silence, Alex Myers. This is an Arthurian knight's tale, although there is no King Arthur, but there is a Merlin. This is a retelling of a French knightly legend. Lord Cador inherits Cornwall on the condition that he and the daughter of the current king have a son, but they have a daughter, Silence, who they spirit away and raise in secret as a son. Years later, Silence is all grown up and wants to become a knight, unaware that he has essentially been raised as a trans man. And that's basically where the story begins. Maya has told this in a very Arthurian style. Stylistically, I just want to say this was absolutely brilliant. This was spot on. I used to read a lot of books like this when I was young, and it was nostalgic to be back there reading this, reading something in the style that I loved so much in my teens and my early 20s. This story was fun and it was so easy to support silence in their endeavours. The problem with the story is there's not a lot of meat to the bones of this book, but there's not intended to be. And it doesn't really require the most complex discussion of the issues. I really liked a line towards the end of this that I found so useful to me in my cis life. I didn't write it down, so I'm going to paraphrase, so the actual quote will be considerably nicer. Today I'm a baker, tomorrow I might be a farmer, settling down with one profession, the profession of my father, for the rest of my life. That seems so boring and so without fulfillment. I'm not sure if I like that or I don't like that for a discussion of gender. I think that that's probably true for some people and not for others. But for me, and for my professional life, I have a degree in physics. I wanted to be a scientist. I began working as an environmental consultant for a petrol company. Then I changed careers completely and became a personal trainer. I started my own business doing that. Then Nell and I started another business where I was a greengrocer, come delivery driver, come manager, come marketing person, come customer service. And now I'm training to be a librarian. And when I was considering whether I wanted to be a librarian, I was so scared. What if I hated it? And now that I'm dived in and I'm doing it, I'm like, what if you change your mind and want to do something else? And I just found so much comfort in what was said here, in what was designed to be a metaphor for gender expression, acceptance in the fluidity of you as a person, and the idea that I want to be a librarian now and I'll do the training and I'll make it work and I'll get there. If in 5 years' time I'm like, this was a silly call, or this no longer works for me, that's cool. I think that this is a really good book to give a young person who likes fantasy or adventure novels to help them empathize with trans people. This was just really good. This was escapism that I loved. Didn't nobody give a shit what happened to Colada, James Hannaham? I want to put a caveat on this book as well. Before, when I said that I looked at the Lambda Awards and I just picked the books that were available without even thinking about it, this was one of the 2 books that I could find. By the way, if you don't know the Lambda Awards, they're an LGBT literary awards that releases heaps and heaps of different and diverse shortlists. Best gay fiction, best lesbian sci-fi, and so on. So I looked for the best trans fiction. Now, I thought that would be entirely trans authors because that's the readathon we were doing. But this one, I'm not sure if James Hannaham is trans or not. I can find nothing online to suggest that he is. I can find nothing online that says that he's cis, but I can find nothing online to say that any of a number of people are cis. And authors, they're such minor celebrities that this sort of information is very hard to track down. This is something I can't verify or disprove, and I just want to say, caveat, that this is a fantastic book and it deals with trans issues, so I'm going to include it in here. This is a book about a black trans woman who gets out of jail, who was in a man's jail and has at some points pretended that their gender is male to make their life easier. They've pretended that their name is not Carlotta, that they are the person society wants them to be, not who they actually are. There are so few books that centre ex-felons. This is a subsection of society that I think are really considered by so many people to be subhuman, which is so wrong when you consider how corrupt, incompetent, and just terrible the legal system and the police are. It shows Carlotta's integration back into life and the struggles that she has. She needs a stable place to live in order to be released, so she nominates her family. But they want to have a party, and it's part of Carlotta's parole condition that she can't be around alcohol on account of her crime being alcohol related. She was robbing a bottle shop and things went a bit wrong. Colada also has to get a job, but she's low on experience and qualifications and nobody wants to employ a criminal. But if she doesn't get one, then she might go back to jail. Colada is trying to process the trauma of jail, of being raped, the systematic abuse at the hands of guards and occasional other inmates. Through this, she also talks about her gender, how it was accepted, ignored, how some men were happy to have anybody female with them, which is exactly the attitude that sounds like it is. This book feels a little bit like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, but much more accessible. A book that more people need to read. Powerful, engaging, emotional. Just a fantastic book. I'm about to reveal the best book I read for this readathon. But before I do that, Subscribe. Do it. Subscribe. There are free cookies. The cookies are a lie. The best book I read for this readathon, I'm Afraid of Men, Vivek Shraya. This little non-fiction book by Vivek Shraya is so thought-provoking. At less than 100 pages, it will take you about 3 hours to read, and everybody should just finish this book quickly. This is an intersectional look at prejudice against trans people, at toxic masculinity, at things like does male privilege exist in trans women, at racism, and just everything. I particularly think men should read this book if you want to treat the trans people in your life better, or even if you don't know trans people but you just don't want to be a dick when one comes into your work or you meet one at a dinner party or whatever. Read this book. Shraya really dismantles internalized misogyny. As a man, it's really easy to say, I'm not part of the problem, look at that guy. But to see the individual pieces of misogyny, you can see what you need to work on, what you need to deconstruct, what you could do better. I love that. It's not just men who can learn from this book. It's not just men who have internalized misogyny. It's everybody. There's also discussions of transness and being femme in the queer community, supporting the bully to fit in, throwing the trans girl under the bus because if she's not the one being picked on, it'll probably be you, and the misogyny of women, trans people, and within the queer community. I don't think anybody is perfect, and I think almost anybody can learn from Shraya. I think I would like to read this in a few months' time and just to refresh myself, see what I've taken in and what I haven't and what I can learn again. I have previously read the subtweet by Shraya, and while that was good, I just didn't expect this from her. A good fiction writer, but an amazing non-fiction writer. Just so 5 stars. Did you join in Trans Girl April? If so, let me know what your highlights were, and let me know if you have any thoughts on any of the books I read. Bye bye.